Hello there. My name's Gina Gardiner, and I'd like to welcome you to this Taking the BS Out of series. Today, I'm going to be talking about parenting and taking the BS out of the relationship between parents and children. Now, first of all, I recognize that children do not come with a manual, and that every child, even though you might have two or three or four or more who are your children, each of them will arrive in this world with a very different personality, a very different profile. And it's really hard as parents to recognize how best to deal with them. So, what are my credentials? Well, I was a teacher for 10 years and then a principal or head teacher for over 20. And many times parents would come and say, how is it that when you talk, they listen? When you tell them to do something, they do it. And when I do it, they don't. And I think it's really important to recognize that what I'm sharing with you today is a distillation of over 30 years' experience of working with children of a variety of ages. And I know that the things that I'm talking about make a real difference. Being a parent is hard. But I think many parents, particularly these days when there's so much going on, there's so many calls upon their time, are really struggling. And children have increased mental ill health. They have a whole range of challenges that they have to deal with, which we as adults really didn't have to do because life was very different. So I want to talk to you about things that can make it easier for your child to thrive and for you to survive and thrive, because ultimately the relationship between you and your child or children is incredibly important. I think many parents think that the most important thing is to be your child's friend. And whilst I do believe that you need to have a really loving, positive relationship, I think children, particularly young children, need you to be their parent and not their friend. Because one of the things that children need is a sense of security, and that comes with boundaries. Now, of course, they need to be age appropriate. They also need to be fair and consistent. And I think for me, one of the things that gets in the way of young people, children and young people, thriving is the lack of consistency. They get very mixed messages, and we're going to be talking about that. All of this has to be age appropriate. But one of the things that strikes me, and it's been proven to me time and time again, is how often we underestimate the capacity of young people, children and young people, to learn. And so I would say to you, just be mindful that give them the opportunity to try. And you don't want to set them up for failure, but you do want them to have the opportunity to stretch their wings. Think about a butterfly, for example. When it comes out of the pupa, if you try and help it out of the pupa, it won't survive, because it's in the fluttering of its wings, its newly furled wings, that it starts to pump blood into those veins, and ultimately it creates strength, which allows that butterfly to fly. And if you think about monarch butterflies, they fly the whole length of America. Remember, I'm talking about age appropriate. But one of the things that struck me is how, if you look at the number of children, for example, who have road accidents, who are run over, it's in that transition between parents taking them to school and then journeying to school on their own. And if they've never walked to school or managed the bus and learnt and been taught how to manage it on their own, then they won't have the road sense. They won't know what to do if the bus doesn't turn up. They won't have that capacity, that resilience, that problem-solving capacity. They have to learn that. And I think one of the problems for young people is life has changed. You know, the days when you could be out on your own with a jam sandwich and a bottle of pop and come home for dinner have gone for many children. And so they don't have that opportunity to grow and develop. And so we as adults have to manufacture that for them. I'm sure you're familiar with the term helicopter parents, your parents who dive in and sort everything out for their children without allowing them the opportunity to explore and find a way through. And all the way through this video, I'm going to be talking to you about ways in which you can give your children, age and ability appropriate, the opportunity to develop and grow. Because ultimately, they're going to be out in the world and they're going to need to be independent. And, you know, I've had conversations with both children who are now adults and parents about when do you let go? How do you allow them to find their way and to learn how to fail and learn from that failure? Now, let me make it very clear. I'm not talking about setting them up for failure, but one of the things that is really evident, and I've worked with thousands of people over the years, both in my capacity as an educator and now as a coach, mentor, and trainer, that it's through the failure that we learn. We don't learn very much when everything is going well, but we do learn if we have the right mindset when things don't go right. So rather than thinking it's a failure, I've got to give up, it's what can I learn from this? How can I do things even better next time? Because it's in that learning that we grow and we develop. You are, as a parent, you are the leader. And I hope that both parents are going to listen to this, because one of the things that makes the biggest difference, both in terms of young people's sense of security and their capacity to thrive, is that they get a consistent message from both parents. The good cop, bad cop makes children very confused, and kids are arch manipulators. They're very, very good at it, and they will play the two sides against the middle given any opportunity. And so if you're not singing from the same hymn sheet, not only do they become insecure, more needy, more difficult, but also your lives are made difficult. And one of the reasons many adult couples argue is around how their children are being brought up. And it's a conversation, or conversations, I would suggest to you, that should happen long before your child arrives on the scene. Be really clear. What are your values? And people talk about values, but they don't talk about the behaviors that underpin them. Because ultimately, you are the one that your child is going to get the most in terms of their values and their beliefs, particularly in those early years. There's much talked about attachment theory, and attachment happens within those first few months of life, where whoever is the main caregiver or caregivers, the child learns to trust those. They look at the expression on your face, the tone of voice, but remember, they also are like little sponges. They absorb your energy. So you might be smiling with your face, but if your body language and your energy is not calm or is angry, that's what they'll take on board. Moreover, they will take on board that they can't trust your face. They can't trust what you're saying. And so one of the biggest lessons I would suggest to you as a parent is manage yourself first. And particularly once your children are able to speak, and as they get older, it's perfectly appropriate to say, I'm really cross at the moment, but before I talk to you, I want to go away and get myself under control. And one of the best ways to do that is deep breathing. It sounds silly, but ultimately, if you take some really deep breaths into the count of 4 or 5 or 6, hold for 4 or 5 for 6, breathe out for 4, for 5, for 6, hold for 4, for 5, for 6, and do that a few times. And what you do, and it's really great if you're a leader in a business or team leader in any context, because you move from left brain thinking, logical, where we tend to catastrophize, to right brain thinking, where we can find solutions and it calms us. And if you're really struggling, another technique is to breathe in. And then when you think you can't breathe in anymore, breathe in again. And when you think you can't breathe in anymore, breathe in again. That impacts on the vagus nerve. It brings your blood pressure down. It gives you a sense of capacity to deal with things, calmness. Always manage yourself first. You are the leader within this context. In many families at the moment, the children are the leader. And what they do is they become more and more extreme, because at the very base of that is the need for them to feel safe. And for that, they need boundaries. But those boundaries need to be consistent. I used to say to my parents, the day that the cat's been sick, the washing machine hasn't gone right, you've overslept, the car won't start, that should be your baseline, rather than when you're having a great day, this is what you allow and this is what's okay. And then when you're having a bad day, suddenly what's been okay on a Tuesday isn't okay on a Thursday. Now, these are the same lessons that I would teach leaders. You need to be consistent. And so think about what is acceptable and be really, really clear about that. I want to talk about the word no. I call the Tesco's version of no. Tesco's, if you're not in the UK, Tesco's is a big supermarket. And you will hear many parents and their children having a conversation as you walk around to do your shopping. And so what you'll hear is, can I have some sweeties? No. Oh, go on, let me have some sweeties. No. I want some sweeties. No. And the child starts to have a tantrum. So the parent then says, oh, okay, then here you are. So what the child does is learn that if I have a tantrum, if I behave badly, I get what I want. Oh, surprise, surprise. They do more of that. So only use the word no when you mean it, and stick to it. So then when they hear the word no, you are conditioning them that no means no. There are lots of other things that you can actually use instead. There are lots of other words that you can use instead. So let me have a think about that. I just want to weigh up the pros and cons. Or, well, these are the choices. If you want to do X, Y, or Z, or you want to have X, Y, or Z, then these are the consequences. And cause and consequence is really, really important. Or you can say, do you know what? I just love you too much to let you have all of these sweeties. They're not good for you. If you're really good, then when we get home, then you can have a snack. In the first instance, it will be harder, particularly if your children are already used to the Tesco's word of the version of the word no. But over time, it will work if you are consistent. Children are like little sponges. They take on board your beliefs, your behaviors, your values. And so be mindful about how you act. You have to be the role model. I'll give an example. When I was a head teacher or principal, I invited a parent to come in and talk to me because their child was using really foul language. And the parent sat in front of me and said, well, I don't know. It doesn't get it from me. I don't blankety blank, 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 blank swear. He never hears me blankety blank, 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 blank swear. And they were completely oblivious to the fact that every word that was a blank was an F word or something like that. We have to be mindful. We have to be aware of the language we use, and not only around using profanity, but what are your beliefs around money? You know, we engage with the beliefs of our parents, and they can color our whole lives. Money doesn't grow on trees. You have to work yourself to death in order to have enough money. So many people have got hang-ups about money, and when you track it back, it's down to how parents have spoken about money, how they live from a place of lack and fear. Now, make no mistake, I do understand that many families are really struggling financially. But I think if you talk about abundance in the broader sense and say, no, you can't have that. Actually, we don't have, we're spending our money on other things. And we think that our relationships, love is more important. But at this time, we don't have the funds to do it. giving children an understanding, we have to live within a budget. And our budget says that actually that's not something that we are prioritizing now. Ultimately, being mindful of the language you use is really, really important. So, for example, when your child has been naughty or done something you don't like, rather than criticize the behavior, oh, you stupid thing, or you lazy person, or whatever, then actually criticize the behavior. So, Jamie, I love you very much. I think you can do better than this. I don't expect you to lie because you've been brought up very differently. Or, you know, when I look at your bedroom, I think that's not the way you've been brought up. Don't want your bedroom to look like that. You deserve more than living in a pigsty, and you're old enough now to ensure that your bedroom is tidy. So come on, get it tidied up. One of the challenges for mums is that our voices are very much at the same pitch as children's. And so what happens is that we nag and we say the same thing over and over again, and it becomes white noise. And then if there's an argument, the child raises their voice, you raise your voice, they raise theirs. And so what you end up with is a shouting match, and it simply doesn't work. And so here's the thing. That's why you've got to get yourself under control first, but you come back and you say very quietly, you know, that's not appropriate. I love you, and I don't think that that is appropriate, because what I'd like you to do is, and then you're very, very clear about what you want, what you need, how it should be, rather than what the thing that you would rather not happen. Now, the reason I was hesitating is because the brain does not compute the word don't. Don't think of a pink elephant. So what happens is our brain has to think of a pink elephant before it can think, oh, I don't need to think about it. Have you ever wondered why, when people are driving along and they're along the side of the road, there's big gaps, and then there's been somebody who's crashed into the tree? And the reason for that is that when we find ourselves out of control and going towards the tree, the natural instinct is to go, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree. Brain doesn't hear don't, it just hears hit the tree, hit the tree, hit the tree. And so rather than that, it's look for the gap, look for the gap. Now, in a moment of emergency, if you've not been used to this way of thinking, it's really challenging. But if this becomes your normal way of being, then if you were in that situation, you would avoid the tree. Same way with your children. Rather than don't talk to me like that, or don't be rude, don't do this. It is, when you speak to me, I'd like you to treat me with respect, please. I always treat you with respect. Remember, you have to model the behaviors. Or your bedroom needs tidying. No more excuses. Go and do it, please. Even voice. Learn the neutral body language, the neutral voice, because one of the catches is to use that, oh, go on, please, victim voice, or real hard edge to your voice. Go and get just stuff done. Go and do your homework. And the child can wriggle off the hook. And remember, this works for leaders as well as parents, because the tone of voice that you're using makes them feel that it's unfair, unjustified, and so on. The more neutral you are, the more they can't wriggle out of it. One of the things that you can do is to use the hard conversations. And if they're old enough, particularly for teenagers, is to write down the number of times they've been late up or so on. And then to talk to them and show them and say, look, I've just been looking at this. You know, in the last 2 weeks, we've had a real struggle getting to school on time because you've not got up with the alarm. I've reminded you, you've ignored me, and so it's going on. And then ask them the question. So what do we do about this? Because it's putting pressure on everybody. You start the day in a bad temper. I get grumpy. How can I manage this? And part of that may be to look at the night before and the fact that they're on their phone until God knows what time, or they're gaming, and so they're really tired. Which brings me to electronics. There's now growing evidence that babies as young as 18 months, toddlers, their brain wiring is changing because they are on electronics so much. And that you've got little babies who are they know how to scroll, they know how to turn the phone on, but they don't know how to pile up bricks and do that in a way that stays, and that they're not reading or at least looking at picture books. And I would say to you, be very mindful that the brain has a capacity to learn things, but the greatest capacity is between birth and 7. The very famous priest who said, "Give me the child at the age of 7 and I'll give you the man." And that's true of women too. And what worries me is that so many young people, so many very small children, have more time with their electronics and the TV than they do with their parents. And I do appreciate that you're busy. But learning to communicate, looking at people and having that conversation starts young. By the time I left school, and we're talking about 2004, over a third of the children in my school, and it was a big school, had no dining room table. They did not sit down together and eat a meal. And I would urge you as a parent, look for the opportunity that where you engage your children in conversation around the dinner table. Turn the telly off, have a rule, no phones. And I would say to you, set some ground rules about electronics and particularly phones and gaming. You know, there was a time when there was no television and no electronics in the bedroom, and children went to bed and went to sleep. And there's growing evidence that one of the reasons that children are finding life so difficult is because they don't get enough sleep, and that sleep is disturbed. And so you have to be the grown-up, you have to be the parent and set boundaries and explain to children why. And things like you leave your phone downstairs at night and you stop on your phone and your electronics at least 90 minutes before sleep time. And make sure that your children have that opportunity to sleep. Things like making sure that your child learns to read. I know we've got AI, and AI is going to make a huge difference. But the thing is, we've got to learn to control that rather than it control us. And so one of the things is you need to be able to read and understand in order to be able to make valued judgments. Children learn best when they're learning to read by sitting with an adult who is actually reading with them and to them. And I would suggest that until your child is reading competently, that's something that needs to happen every day. Dads, I've got a word for you. And that is, they need to see you reading. They need to see that you value reading. 80% of the school curriculum now, probably more actually, is based on the written word. And so if your child isn't reading, your child is really, really going to struggle. And so the early work, rhyming songs, they might sound silly, but actually through the rhyme, those children learn how to look at patterns of things. They learn to engage in prediction and understand sequence. And all of those things are just so important for children's intellectual expansion and learning. Playing games, involving them in cooking, engaging with you. One of the reasons why so many children play up is because they want your attention, and they will have your attention on any terms. And if you don't give them your attention, then they will become more and more extreme in their wish to have your time. I can remember talking to a client, and he was talking about his 3 little girls, and they were about 10, 7 and 3, I think. And he was saying, you know, we're really concerned they're not doing well at school and their behavior is becoming more and more extreme. And as we spoke, it became evident that he and his wife spent a lot of time between coming home from work and the children going to bed. He was on his phone or computer, she was on her phone. And I talked to him about the fact that because the children wanted his attention, they didn't want to watch the telly. They didn't want to be on their phone. They wanted him. And when he then created a space, so there was a moratorium from the time he came home until the children went to bed, the children's behavior improved. He sat and read with them. He played games with them. And they did learning based games. He helped them with their homework. The change in those children in a few very, very short weeks was astounding. The change in the relationship between him and his wife was also very marked. Children need your attention. They need you to invest in them. You've had them, you love them, and so it really is time to invest in them. And I make no mistake, I understand how challenging that is. But better to give them half an hour of focused 100% attention than 3 hours of constantly moaning at them because they're interrupting you. And if you say to them, this is the deal, you've got half an hour of me and I will focus on you, and then I've got to focus on my work, because that's what pays the rent, and that's what, or the mortgage, and that's what allows you to do nice things. So that's the deal. Are you happy with that deal? Because that's how it's going to work. Setting the boundary, pre-framing it. Then after the 30 minutes, now I've got to get on with my work. And so why don't you go and whatever? Now, to start with, they may interrupt you, but then you go back and say, so what was our deal? Now, recognize that if you want my time, then we have to do it in this way because I've got to, blah, okay? The power of language and communication, two-way communication, is so important. And if you think about the teenage UG years, you know, how are you? If you have created good lines of communication when they're younger, you have the greatest likelihood that that communication will continue through the teenage years. Now, I have a theory that teenagers should be put in a shoebox at the age of about 11 or 12, and you can open it when they're 27. But the reality is that the investment that you make early on is what makes all the difference. When they are teenagers, and I would suggest this starts, you know, perhaps at the age of 10 and 11, you want to make them aware of money. And so I would really urge you to give your child an allowance, but really clear about what they spend their allowance on, and be really quite clear about the boundaries. And the reason I suggested, the number of parents who didn't have a lot of money and who were being coerced, pressured, blackmailed into spending money that they didn't have. And I want to share just one example. So mum came in and said, I'm really at my wit's end. I've got 2 children. The younger one is into Pokemon cards, and I have a tantrum every day about the fact that he wants more. And my oldest child is demanding designer shampoos and face creams and all the rest. And I just don't have the money. And so we came up with a budget for both of them, which they were given. But the younger one, he had to pay for anything that he wanted that was not his normal clothes, school uniform. She paid for everything in terms of the basic things, and his entertainment in terms of paying for his clubs and activities and so on. The older one, who was 14, it was, I will pay all your food if you eat at home. You have an allowance. I'll pay for your school uniform, but everything else has to come out of your allowance. And so if you want designer clothes, suggest you go to the thrift or the charity shop. If you want designer shampoos, well, you're going to have to budget. This was set up, and always, if you're going to set up something like this, don't start it immediately. So it was from the 1st of the month, next month, this is what's going to happen. So start thinking about it and start looking at the price of things, because from that day, that's how it's going to be. The first time she went shopping after the 1st of the month, the little one, instead of moaning about Pokemon cards, And just to go back, I'd give the money in cash, okay? And within that money, the agreement, so much has to be spent on you, but always a little bit of savings. And I would suggest a little bit to go to charity, because that's really training them, even if it's just a tiny amount for savings and a tiny amount for charitable work donation. That sets the tone for the rest of their life. Anyway, this mum was in the shop and they went through the aisle where the Pokemon cards are, and she said to her youngest child, "You going to buy any?" "No, they're too expensive." Went to the shampoo aisle with their other child and saw them pick up the economy size of shampoo, and didn't remark, but noticed how their whole demeanor had changed. They were being given responsibility, which they were taking seriously. They had the physical money in their hands, and they were then able to spend it. Now, here's the thing about physical money. These days, when we tap our card or tap our phone, it's really easy to get completely out of touch with how much money you're spending. I'll tell you when it really surfaced for me. Last Christmas, I had a problem. I thought I'd lost my credit card. Actually, I hadn't, but I cancelled it. And once I'd cancelled it, it was too late. And it was 2 weeks before Christmas. And so I had to keep going to the hole in the wall and getting cash. And I suddenly realized just how much money I was spending, which I hadn't. I mean, I'd got a rough idea, but I hadn't realized how much it was mounting up. Now, I've had many years of budgeting, and I am someone who is pretty good with money. But when youngsters are learning, it's much easier when they learn with physical money. And of course, they've then got to learn to look after it. And that, again, is part of growing up. I want to go back to confidence. And so many people lack confidence because parents, in their wish to make children better, have done a lot of criticizing. And I would suggest to you that there are ways of saying to a child, that's lovely, but not criticizing in a destructive way. One of the things I always do is to say, "What do you think of it?" And they'll say, "Well, I don't think it's very good." And then you can pick out, "I like the colors," if it's a picture for a very young, lovely colors. And cool, you've really captured the dog or whatever. What would you do differently if you're going to do it again? And then get them to encourage them to really reflect and look at it. We can't be good at everything. And if you, one of the things I think that so many youngsters struggle with is that sense of being entitled. And I think expectations that children should contribute to the household, age and ability appropriate, I think is really important. Love does not mean that you are a doormat. And I can remember so many parents coming in saying, "I'm cooking 4 meals," and then they turn, because they all like something different, and they turn their nose up. They don't help around the house. They just drop their clothes on the floor. And I'm rushing around like a lunatic. I'm working. And. It is important that you teach your child respect, and that you teach your child the skills with which they can then learn to be independent. And so age appropriate, they can help you sort the washing out. So with very little children, you make it a game. Let them match the socks, for example, because in doing so, matching is a mathematical thing, and it's really, really important. Helping you cook. They might make more mess, and you might have to put the pastry that they've rolled around for 34,000 times into the bin, and then surreptitiously put jam tarts in the oven that they think are theirs in order for them to get confidence. But you need to be a bit creative. But ultimately, you're their parent, you're not their best friend, although I want you to have a loving relationship that as an adult can then become very much a friendship. But when they're little and when they're teenagers, and I think teenagers, they need more support, not less than little ones. With the little ones, you can put them under your arm and you can say, "We're going," and you just scoop them up. Very difficult with teenagers. And I think teenagers are really struggling at the moment. Social media is such a double-edged sword. They suffer from comparatonitis. They want to belong. They don't know who they are. And you can give them that stability and help them have a really good body image. The other thing I want to talk to you about is diet. And I know from school that children who have highly processed food, lots of sugar, actually struggle far more with concentration, with their capacity to behave. And so I would urge you a really good diet with as much fresh and unprocessed things as you can afford, both in terms of money and time. But there's more and more evidence that those early years where, having too much sugar and fat, over a third of children are now obese. And we as adults have to take responsibility for that. Now, this is not about body shaming. This is not about telling children you're fat, you need to lose weight, or being unkind. It starts earlier than that. And it starts about ensuring that your children are given a really healthy diet as they grow up. And then things like, these energy drinks, which we now know are so dangerous to young people because they're full of caffeine. The greater self-confidence young people have, the greater that they honor their body, the less likely they are to go into drugs, alcohol, abuse of themselves in any form, shape or form. And being a parent is a great responsibility, but it's a great privilege and a great pleasure when the early work has been done. You're not doing it alone, you need to do it with your school. And I will be doing a video about getting the best out of your school and the communication with those. But ultimately, you're their mum or their dad or their main carer if you're a foster carer or you are looking after children in a care home situation. You are their security. You have to be their bright, shining star. And one of the biggest gifts that you can give a child is to believe in them, even when they don't believe in themselves. Does that mean that you give them a sense of entitlement? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that you're their champion. And as their champion, you have high expectations for them and from them. Not unreasonable ones. Don't live your life through your child. If you wanted to be a tennis champion, don't force your child to play tennis. Let them experiment. Let them be curious and find for themselves the things that they're passionate about. Let them live their own dream, because ultimately they will then become highly successful, fulfilled, and happy people. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you need some help, then please do reach out, and all of the details will be with this video. Take care, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye now.